Hi everybody, welcome to this week's video. We are back outside in the flower patch this week. Today is the first nice day. It feels like in a long time. Last week was dreadful weather with just torrential rain all week, and it's been a bit gusty as well. The river levels in the Tweed really came up really high, and thankfully they've gone back down just now. So it's great to be able to get out in the garden because I'm really feeling the time pressure to get some of these bulbs in just now. Today I'm going to be concentrating on getting some narcissi in, some alliums and some irises. Still holding off on my tulips until the weather has chilled down even further because we haven't had a proper frost yet, and tulips prefer to be planted later so that we can avoid that tulip fire. So what I am doing at the moment is I am prepping some of my beds for the bulbs, and this involves digging a trench down the sides of my beds because I plant the bulbs down the edges of the beds so that I can plant my autumn sown hardy annuals in the middle. That means that I am not wasting the whole bed space just on spring flowering bulbs. I can utilise it to get those first early summer annuals flowering there as well. And then when they are both finished and the foliage has died back on the bulbs, I can cut that back and I can remove those first sown hardy annuals, and I can put in a second succession sown planted out then, and they will then flower in the same bed later on in the summer, early autumn next year. So it's trying to make the most of my beds. I don't have a huge amount of space for flower farming here. I've just got an acre of garden, and only about a quarter of that is probably used intensively for flower growing. I try to use no-dig methods in the garden wherever I can and don't like to disrupt the soil if at all possible, but for bulb planting that's probably one of the only times that I do dig some trenches to get my bulbs in. So for the tulips I'll dig trenches in the beds, and also just now I'm digging a channel down the side of the beds to get the bulbs in there as well, but I am trying to leave that middle section completely untouched if I can so that its soil is not disrupted, and that's where I'm going to be putting my autumn sown hardy annuals next year. And after I have planted the bulbs in today, I will be mulching it over the next month or two with some of my homegrown compost as well, just to add some extra nutritious soil to the levels that are already in there, and that'll bed down and settle in and help with just making it a more nutritious, balanced soil over the winter time. So these narcissi that I'm putting in today are pheasant's-eye narcissi, and they are quite late flowering. They'll be one of the last in the garden for me about May time, mid-May time next year. And the reason I'm planting these today is that I've got an awful lot of early flowering narcissi in the garden. I've got lovely Cheerfulness, Winston Churchill, Obdam, all sorts of lovely narcissi that come a lot earlier. And every year I always say I'm going to plant some more pheasant's-eye because I've got a few but not that many, and I really love them. They're fantastic flower to have later on in May, and May is often a tricky one for me as well because it's a month in the year where you can get some gaps sometimes, because you can often get your tulips flowering really early and your early flowering narcissi, and then there is a bit of a gap before those annuals start to flower as well. So if I put in some late flowering narcissi, then hopefully I'll not have so much of a gap. I'll have flowers that keep going through the whole of May. So my trench in the garden isn't that deep. It's deep enough that it's about 3 times the size of the bulb. So you're wanting to plant bulbs about 2 to 3 times their depth. So we'll have a look at that a bit more closely just now. So this is the edge of my bed here. The cable you can see is the irrigation cable that just stays in over the winter, and I just move it to the side. And I have just dug a small channel all the way along the side of my bed there for putting my bulbs in. And I'll space them out so that they're not touching, that they're about the same width apart as they are wide, so about an inch or 2 to separate them. And then I will cover them back up with soil, and then when I am finished planting the bulbs today, I'll be able to come along and mulch on top of the beds with extra soil, an inch or 2 from our homemade compost, and that will just be a nice extra nutritious feed for them over the winter time. The compost will bed in and improve the soil structure. When you're planting bulbs, make sure you wear gloves because a lot of bulbs can be irritating to your skin. And when you're planting them, make sure that you put the root section there down the way, and it's the pointy section that should be pointing up the way. And space them out so that there's a good inch or so between them. So that's it, pointy end up, and then they'll be ready to get covered up with soil. When you're planting bulbs into your garden as well, make sure that the soil is free draining, it's got good drainage. You can always add some grit or some sand to improve it as well. The most important thing is that your bulbs are not going to get waterlogged and rot over the winter time. So in between the pheasant's-eye narcissi that I have planted here, I've also interplanted some silver chimes and some cheerfulness just to top up the numbers that I had of that, and also some alliums. So that should be some really nice spring colour along the edges of the bed next year. I'm just going to cover them up now with some soil, and then I am going to just dig a channel down the other side of the bed, and I will plant some pheasant's-eye down that side as well and put some irises in with that. When you're putting the soil back around your bulbs after planting them, just be careful not to topple them over. You still want the pointy end to be facing up the way. So I just normally sprinkle a little bit round about it to begin with before I would put spadefuls on top, just to settle them in and give them some help standing up, and then you can shovel your soil on top after that. So here I am digging that second trench on the other side for the pheasant's-eye and the iris, and I'll plant the bulbs in here and then I'll cover them over with soil. If I've got enough bulbs left when I have planted in amongst perennials and also in this bed here, I will lift some of the turf in the lawn at the front and I will add some of the pheasant's-eye bulbs there to naturalise. I've been adding a few different types of narcissi every year to the front garden, and as time goes on these will naturalise and create a really nice display. I've got a lot of bulbs to plant and they won't all fit in my beds. A lot of my beds already have bulbs along the edges of them. So what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to plant a lot in containers. This is great. I'll show you how to do a bulb lasagna in one of my videos. And also I love putting them in containers because you can move them around. So you don't really know what weather you're going to get in the springtime. Sometimes it can be dreadful, it can be snowy, it can be rainy, it can be windy, or it can be a really nice spring, really hot, and your bulbs might all come out together, and you don't want that to happen. You want to have your flowers coming out over a good period of weeks to be able to enjoy them, and especially if I've got weddings as well, I want to be able to have them flowering at just the right time. So if some of the bulbs are in containers, I can move them to the shade if they're coming on too quickly. I can move them into the greenhouse if the weather is terrible with a lot of rain or snow. And the other place that I'm going to plant some bulbs is in amongst my flowers that I've got on the bed, so my perennials. Those won't be quite flowering, they'll just about to be thinking about it in May. So it's nice to have some bulbs and some colour from those flowers coming up in between the perennials that haven't quite got going. So this bed here is one of my perennial beds, and I can see at the moment that I've got some Guillaume here, I've got some Aquilegia, I can see Astrantia there, got some hellebores. So these are all perennials that will come into flower at different times. The hellebores will be first, the Guillaumes and the Astrantia and the Aquilegia will probably be late May, early June. And if I can pop some bulbs in little groups in between these perennials, then that'll be a nice show of colour just before these come out. The pheasant's-eye do have some lovely flowers on them for a good number of weeks, so actually they'll probably flower just before these perennials come out, and then they'll keep going to complement them as the perennials get going, and then they'll probably fade out around the same time together. And then we'll cut back the perennials, and you'll get a second flush of those later in the year for things like Astrantia. You want to dig a hole deep enough to have your bulbs 2 to 3 times their depth. So I've just covered over the bulbs with the soil from roundabout that I had dug out, and my friendly robin has come back to see me as well. So I'm going to choose another area beside the perennials to dig out now and add a few more bulbs to it. That's me planted up all the bulbs for this morning. Plenty more still to do, but we'll leave that for the rest of the week. And I'll show you next week how to do a bulb lasagna. So I'm going to be quite excited about doing different combinations of spring bulbs in those containers next week. Time now for a cup of tea and put the kettle on and have some lunch, I think. Thanks so much for watching today. It's great to have had you with us, and if you've just newly subscribed to my channel, thanks for coming along. It's going to be great sharing my stories with you, and please feel free to ask any questions in the comments sections. It's great to hear about how you're getting on in your gardens as well. In the next few weeks I will be lifting the dahlias once they have properly frosted, and I'll be storing them for the winter and showing you how I do that. I'm going to be making bulb lasagnas in my containers, and I'm also going to be planting my tulips now that it has started to get colder this week.